Good afternoon, and welcome to the Columbus Metropolitan Club. Welcome to our in-house audience. It's so great to see you here again. This is my first return to in-person, and it just feels so wonderful to be out and about again. So glad there's so many of you that already have gotten vaccinated, and doesn't that make us feel a little safer? CMC live streaming is presented by the Emergency Response Fund of the Columbus Foundation in partnership with the Columbus Dispatch, PNC, and NBC4i. Thank you for those sponsorships. We'd like also to thank those of you who purchased a virtual seat for today's forum. We're very grateful for that support, largely because of you, we're able to continue this live streaming. You can learn more about CMC, register for events, join or renew your membership, purchase a virtual seat, or make a donation anytime at columbusmetroclub.org. Today's forum is sponsored by Barnes & Thornburg. Won't you help me thank them now? And let me begin by saying the U.S. Attorney's Office serving the Southern District oversaw several notable investigations this past year, including the first energy racketeering case against former House Speaker Larry Householder and others, and alleged pay-to-play schemes involving members of Cincinnati City Council. Domestic terrorism, illegal guns and drugs, political corruption. What do these look like in real life? Well, today we get to hear what this looks like from behind the scenes. Let's welcome our speakers, former U.S. Attorney for the Southern District, whose term was far too short, David DeVillers, and our host, CMC board member and co-anchor of NBC4, Colleen Marshall. Colleen, it's all yours.
I think we can take these off now. Welcome, everyone, and a special welcome to you, and we appreciate you coming to talk to us, because in my job, I don't very often get to pick the brain of a U.S. attorney, but now you're in private life, so you have no excuse.
I'll find one.
Well, why don't you first of all give us a little bit about your background. You have had a storied career, not only as a prosecutor here in Franklin County, as the U.S. Attorney, but also you have done international consulting because you worked for the Justice Department. So give us a quick bio of what your career has been like.
So I went to law school here in Columbus, interned at the Franklin County Prosecutor's Office under Mike Miller, and then became an attorney, got hired on, and Ron O'Brien came in, and I worked there for 10 years. I was the director of the gang and organized crime unit with a lot of really, really great prosecutors there. Jimmy Lowe, Liz Garrity, a lot of people that have kind of moved on to different things out of the county prosecutor's office, Greg Peterson. And we've, after 9/11, I tried to get into DOJ, the U.S. Attorney's Office. I was successful, and I worked here for in the U.S. Attorney's Office in Columbus since 2002, and I was asked to work on some foreign terrorist organizations in Iraq during the Iraq War in 2004. So I went there in 2004 to investigate what we call an FTO, foreign terrorist organization. And apparently they felt that I was dumb enough to go in 2004, that they invited me back in 2006, 2007 to work with the Iraqi High Tribunal in the prosecution of Saddam Hussein. I was the advisor to the prosecution chamber for that case.
So you really haven't done anything remarkable, is what you're saying. No, you have had an incredible career, and I don't want to gloss over what you've done here locally and recently. In fact, let's talk about the case that everybody has been talking about. The Speaker of the House here at the Ohio State House, taken into custody in what you labeled the largest bribery scheme in the state history. How did your investigation of that begin, and how did we get to where we are right now with those charges pending?
Well, I can talk a little bit about it. I can't get into a lot of details because, of course, it is a pending case. There's only indictment against Mr. Householder. There have been some pleas on the case and investigations ongoing. And I think I brought that up in July of last year that in a lot of ways the investigation started in July because we were at a covert phase, which means we didn't want the people that we were charging, investigating, know about it until that point. And so at that point, we, and I mean the FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office, were able to interview witnesses, open up grand jury testimony, subpoena documents, conduct search warrants, knowing that they know we're looking at them now, okay? So you have to go back the year before that is when we really started looking into them, and that's based on, I'm not gonna talk in detail about that, but open source material being the indictment, we started looking into Mr. Householder and the other people of what we deemed an enterprise, have alleged an enterprise, and their dealings with through Generation Now and First Energy.
You mentioned these are RICO charges. These are federal conspiracy charges. Are you baffled, or do you have an opinion about the fact that he's still serving in the Ohio legislature?
I try to, so I know I'm no longer U.S. attorney and I'm not subject to the Hatch Act, but I also don't want some defense attorney during the trial say, yeah, Mr. DeVillers had something against Larry Householder, therefore he's spewing his opinions throughout the greater Franklin County, Columbus, Southern District of Ohio, tainting a possible jury. So I'm still going to be careful about what I say about Mr. Householder. I will say I'm surprised he's still in office, yes.
Okay, that was a good way to put it. Okay. So here's one of the questions I've had about this case from the beginning. These 5 people, one of them who apparently has committed suicide, I think 2 now have pled in the case. Charges still pending against Matt Borges and Larry Householder, former speaker, now a lawmaker. This was RICO, a conspiracy case in which you have alleged $60 million worth of bribes.
62.
62. Somebody had to pay those bribes. Your investigation also involves First Energy. Why have no charges been filed? The money had to come from somewhere. Someone was behind the enterprise, making the bribes, controlling what was happening in the legislature, violating the public trust. Why no charges against First Energy or their new safe harbor corporation?
Well, I think, again, I don't want to speak out of turn and tick off my AUSA and U.S. Attorney colleagues, but the investigation is ongoing, and it's clearly, right, so when we brought this up in July and we were going to do the press conference, we knew, yeah, we got the bribees, where are the bribers, right, and that's clearly, there's no secret that, it takes 2 to tango, and part of the problem is the investigation in the federal system. We very, very much lean on our grand jury, right? So, and as I said, the investigation really started in July to some extent. That grand jury has been suspended and postponed throughout 2020 and 21 because of COVID. We couldn't bring them in these little rooms. You can't Zoom with grand juries. And so that's slowed down. We were able to bring in grand juries here and there, but to bring in witnesses and to compel them to testify in grand jury, even doing some grand jury subpoenas requires that. So it clearly slowed down the investigation. I know this investigation is ongoing, and I know the grand jury started up again in March 1st. So I expect that investigation is rolling along pretty well right now.
Without trying to make you give specifics, just in general, when you are investigating a company that might be involved in wrongdoing, isn't it difficult when there's this board, there are multi people, a company is not a person. So doesn't that make it more difficult?
Yeah, I think, and of course we indicted this Generation Now, which was the 501c4. We indicted that company as well. But companies are all built on people, so from people, and the companies themselves can be prosecuted. They can cease to exist. They can be fined. Restitution to perhaps victims can be brought back, so you can punish them that way. But it is difficult, and when you're doing a covert investigation on the company itself, it's document driven. So when you start subpoenaing, bank records or IP addresses, they often gets back to them. So it's very difficult to do that in a sort of covert matter. It's very overt once you start to do that. You can ask the court to seal the subpoena and the bank not to to disclose that, and they often do, but often it gets back to them, and we know that. So that's the difficult part of it.
Yeah, I also want to ask you, Deb Price mentioned your term was far too short as U.S. Attorney. I don't think anyone is questioning your competence or the job you did. In fact, people thought it was remarkable, some of the big cases that you were able to pass through in the short amount of time you were there. You are not there anymore because of politics. As soon as you were appointed by a Republican president, as soon as a Democrat president comes in, and vice versa. When we see a change in party at the White House, we sometimes see on the local level very competent people have to leave their jobs. Is that a flaw in this system?
Well, I think so, because I got fired. But I think, you look at it as, politics is local, except if you're in D.C., right? So there's DOJ, has 94 U.S. attorneys throughout the entire country. I was one of them. And I think that there's a lot of pressure from administrations to clean shop. There are, and there always are, both with R's and D's. U.S. attorneys are appointed probably more political and not career guys. Like, I'm a career guy. And there are a lot of U.S. attorneys that were career guys. I'm disappointed, but I'm not disappointed with anybody, because I just, when I agreed to do this, I knew this was part of the system, and this could be something that that would happen. I think the thing that could be changed, and there's a 2012 law that prohibits me to go back to DOJ in any capacity for 5 years, like as an AUSA. So that's a fairly new law. I don't know if people really thought that through, because there are a lot of really, really dedicated AUSAs in the career, U.S. attorneys in both D's and R's in each administration that would gladly go back and to the line and be, prosecute murders and racketeering and things like that. And that brain drain, I think, is something that could be changed.
In the day-to-day functioning of that office when you were there, though, did you care who was a D, who was an R? Did you feel like politics impacted the job you could do?
Not in the Southern District of Ohio, no. I don't even know who the D's or R's were. So, when I knew I was going to get fired, and I was like, all right, who can replace me from the office? I'm like, well, I don't know who the D's and R's are to some extent. So. It's no secret, I've solicited people in my office to see if they'd be interested in putting him to be a U.S. attorney. So the answer is no. But that's the Southern District of Ohio. I'm sure there are other districts and jurisdictions where politics have come into play. And I've been fortunate. I've worked in really 2 Democratic presidential administrations, 2 Republicans, and I've been fortunate in that politics have never come into play. That I've seen. I have seen priorities change, but you expect that out of administrations. But I haven't had a particular case where they said, don't do this or do this.
I think we all would feel better if politics weren't part of our judicial system. There's a move on now to have judges on the ballot have to declare on the ballot whether they are Democrat or Republican, where in the past we want judges to be so non-biased that they don't have to be political. What do you think about that movement? Should we know when we vote whether someone's a Democrat or a Republican?
Well, I think in practical terms, if you really want to know, you could find out, because you have the slate cards, right? So
right.
Who the D's and who the R's are, and you could do that. I'd go a step further. Now this is very liberating to me, because I've never been able to say anything like this in my career because of the Hatch Act. So there are also the ideas of appointing judges through independent committees, and then letting the people de-elect them. That is, if there's a particular judge that they feel is poor or they don't like, then they, as the people, as citizens, we can move to unelect them as being a judge. And some states have that, and that seems to me the best way to take politics out of being a judge, because you have to raise money, you have to run, you have to do ads, you have to and it can be very, I've spent my career prosecuting corrupt politicians in a lot of ways. And
name some.
Well, I mean, you can, and I had sent a judge to prison, actually, a sitting judge, so, a guy named Judge McAuliffe. Again, he got involved in politics. He had to raise money, and when you do that, every time you have to raise money, and you absolutely 100% do as an elected judge, both in common pleas and municipal and the Supreme Court, there's always that even appearance of impropriety. And if we could somehow get rid of that, I think that would be fantastic.
You mentioned you were involved in the prosecution of Saddam Hussein. You were fighting terrorism overseas. As you look at the landscape now, where is our greatest threat? Domestic terrorism or foreign terrorism?
I think we have to, there's a big difference between an FTO, a foreign terrorist organization, and a domestic terror organization. There's different legal differences. If an FTO is declared by the State Department with input by the President and the Department of Justice, and they're on a list, right? You know who they are. They're ISIS. They're Al Qaeda. There's a list of I don't think there's 40-something of them. And domestic terrorism or domestic terrorist organizations don't really exist in the legal term as far as criminal law is concerned. There's elements of an offense that makes there's domestic terrorist acts. And I wouldn't necessarily, so as a lawyer, I'm not ready to say domestic terrorism as I'm going to say extremist groups. So you have extremist groups both on the right and on the left, and that's those extremes in the disinformation that either they've bought into or their ideologies and what they're willing to do to go forward. I think that's the biggest threat within the United States. I still think we need to really be careful about foreign terrorist organizations as well, though.
Well, the foreign terrorist organizations that you fought against, we hear the president now talking about pulling out of Afghanistan. Do you think that is an invitation for them to rebuild themselves?
It could be. Basically quite frankly, any failed state in Afghanistan is I would no longer declare a failed state. It's just, is there political will for the Afghan government to fight, to stop giving safe harbor to, Al Qaeda? You've got other places like Yemen that are falling apart. That could be a failed state. You've got, places in Africa and Somalia that are failed states. And when you have that vacuum, that's where terrorist organizations go to breed and recruit.
So why are you reluctant to call the extremist groups here in this country who do terrorist acts, why are you reluctant to call them domestic terrorists?
Well, no, I don't. If they're committing terrorist acts, then they're a terrorist group, right? So they follow that definition. If they, blow up a power grid because of their political views and attempt to influence, that's the elements of the offense, right? So then they're a terrorist group. I think that we get so tied up in, they're domestic terrorists. No, they're just extremists. They're extremists. They have extreme views, and when are they going to commit acts? They become a terrorist group when they commit the crime, right? They're not a terrorist group until they commit the crime.
So characterize for me your take on what happened in Washington on January 6th. As you were watching that unfold, what were you thinking?
Who in Ohio has gone there to infiltrate the Capitol building? And we were on calls. I was on a call with, very quickly, I was on a call with Chris Hoffman, who was the special agent in charge in Columbus, or in Ohio, for the FBI. And then I was on a call with DOJ, and, we were putting out, I put out right away, put a press release that anyone that has crossed state lines with the intention of committing violence or stopping the proceedings within the Capitol building are going to be prosecuted. And we have prosecuted a lot of them.
And there are Ohio ties. What can you tell us? I know you can't get specific about cases, but tell us, should we be surprised at the Ohio elements that were there that day?
No, I don't want to pick on Ohio necessarily, but yeah, I think that there a lot in the Midwest I think a lot of people went to the Capitol and were part of that. We do have militia groups and extremist groups in Ohio, and we know who they are. We know what to some extent what they're up to, and the FBI is very good at that intelligence gathering. But the thing is, you can't do anything, especially within the United States, until they commit the crime or are about to commit the crime. We had the individuals that were conspiring to commit a crime against abducting the governor of Michigan. That actually happened in Dublin, Ohio, one of the meetings that we knew about. We were on it, and stopping it. But you have to, for a conspiracy, as the lawyer, you have to let it go a little bit to be able to establish a conspiracy. But a lot of what we do is suppress it, especially with a lot of these extremist groups, I'll call, let them know that they're being watched. Let them know that, stealing firearms is a crime. Let them know that, calling and on the internet and talking about committing crimes is a crime. And suppressing it's probably better than waiting for it to happen. But when it does, that's when they become a criminal enterprise, like RICO.
Your office was involved, I believe, in stopping what they planned to do against the governor of Michigan. How early were you in on that, and how were you in on that?
So we work with our other U.S. attorneys' offices throughout the country. That was the U.S. attorney in Michigan's case, but the FBI was involved in the. We have sources, we've had sources in some of these extremist groups that we're reporting on other sources in extremist groups. So you know where you're doing good when you have that, but you have sources and you have search warrants, and if we're able to establish probable cause that they're using a phone or a computer or a particular, or even on code in the internet, we can surveil it, and that's what we do. The Patriot Act allows us to do that with domestic terrorist organizations as well as foreign terrorist organizations.
Do you think that we will see growth in this type of extremist activity? Some of the people, as we saw on January 6th, took great pride in what they were doing, and foolishly photographed themselves and posted it, and made your job, I imagine, the job of people investigating that, a lot easier.
We love it when they do that. It's fantastic.
Did you think, from your perspective, again, as a prosecutor, what was Donald Trump's role in that? Was it an incitement?
I don't think it would be a legal incitement if I was a prosecutor. Well, if it was legal incitement, he'd be indicted right now. One of the administrations, or he will be indicted. So whether it's impeachable offense, that's different. That's a political decision, and he didn't help. I think that's obvious to say, but I don't think he meets the elements of the criminal offense of inciting violence.
So you would not be pursuing charges against him if you were in that role still?
Yes, based on what I know and I've seen, and that I would not.
Let's bring it back home a little bit. You were involved in a lot of the gang activity. I think the Short North Posse was one of your cases.
Yes.
And back at that time, there was a lot of talk about what gangs were doing in Columbus. We don't hear that as much anymore. Is it because of the efforts that you took more than a decade ago with that Short North Posse case? And maybe if some of our younger people in the audience, you might want to remind them what that was about. But it was a massive case. One of the prosecutors lives on my street, and I remember he had to have armed guards at his house.
Is that Doug Stead?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was the X-Clan. That was Ronald Dawson X-Clan, which I prosecuted too with Doug. And yeah, my wife was thrilled about that case because they were guarding us too for a year. That was in the 90s. So it evolved. So in the 90s, when I was a young prosecutor, it was Bloods and Crips and folks and gangster disciples, and very much based on there really wasn't any dogma to what they were doing. So if you're in the blood and you're wearing blue, we're going to shoot at you. And that's kind of how it went. Now, Dawson was kind of one of the first people in X-Clan that tried to capitalize on that and become kind of hitmen, sort of traditional organized crime. And a lot of those gangs in the 90s morphed into that, including the Short North Posse. Now, the Short North Posse was kind of a drug dealing enterprise for the most part in the Short North, but in the later 2000s and up until the big Short North Posse case I tried in 2016 with Kevin Kelly as the AUSA officer, Brian Martinez, and it was a massive. In fact, Mike Miller was one of the defense attorneys in that case. So it was a big case, and there were 16 murders within a 10-year period. But it had nothing to do with, they weren't killing anybody because of their rival gang, because of their color. They're killing people over the bottom dollar. They're killing people because they knew they had drugs and money and they were going to take it and sell it. Or they were killing people because they were getting paid to as hit, or they were killing people because they felt that they were going to try to rob them or take their drug territory. Not just in Columbus, but in places like, I think in Newark and Zanesville, and where they grew into what you would call traditional organized crime. And that's what you're seeing now in Columbus. That's why you're seeing less, they call themselves Bloods or Crips. For an enterprise for RICO, and that's what we'd use, we try to, kind of give them some sort of name, because often they do, but it's not your traditional, they've morphed. And particularly with cartels being a part of the city now, Columbus is a source city for cartels. And that's why we're seeing, blows up. And fentanyl is the new crack. And it's horrific, and it's worth a lot of money, and it's really, really easy to bring in because it's such a small amount.
We routinely get notices from the coroner's office that there's a new and more deadly source of fentanyl on the street, and that there have been so many overdoses within a week's period. And is this when you hear Mexican cartels, we think of Law and Order and on NBC at New York. This is Columbus, Ohio. Do you think people would be shocked at the level of drugs that are on our streets?
Yes. And be clear, in Columbus, the Sinaloa cartel is here. 100%. DEA says it, the Mexican authorities say it, we work with the Mexican authorities. They come here and they deliver mostly fentanyl now. So, and the reason, Dr. Ortiz is the Franklin County coroner, and we talk a lot. We still actually talk a fair amount. And the problem we're seeing, the scourge of fentanyl was, it used to be black tar heroin coming in. And, 100 kilos of black tar heroin is as potent as 1 kilogram of fentanyl, okay? And you can, between 50 and 100, depending on or carfentanil. So it's so easy, 100 kilos of cocaine is a lot. It's hard to bring in. But fentanyl is easy to bring in. And the drug dealers, once it gets here by the cartels, their connections are good old Americans. So that's very rare. We used to see cartels actually selling black tar heroin on the streets. It's not. It's like a franchise. So it comes to Columbus. It's sold in Columbus, but it's also distributed to West Virginia, down south towards Cincinnati, and to southern Pennsylvania. In fact, my colleagues in West Virginia and Pennsylvania, the U.S. Attorney's Office, always said, why are half the people in my prison have 614 tattoos on? Because they're Columbus guys go in there selling the fentanyl that gets brought here by the cartels. So that's kind of how it happens, and why it's really a problem, and it's a huge problem last year and the beginning of 2019, is we never, ever, ever saw cocaine mixed with heroin or fentanyl. They just didn't do it. They're two different, one's a stimulant, one's an opioid, but you still have the euphoria regardless. We started to see fentanyl mixed in with cocaine. And so if you're doing a line of cocaine and your drug dealer isn't perfect about what they do and you snort that, you're going to die. And what we've seen is the amount of overdose deaths in Franklin County, the vast majority of them are fentanyl mixed with cocaine now. And that's why we're seeing so many people drop dead, people that aren't traditional heroin addicts.
The same thing that makes Columbus, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I understand that the same thing that makes Columbus a transportation center, a distribution center, we are close to much of the population. If you come here to Columbus, that's why people have their hubs here, that they can push things out.
Yep.
Isn't that why it also makes us an attractive drug hub?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that's exactly why. We go, you got Pittsburgh, you got Indianapolis, you got Cincinnati, you got Cleveland, all within 2 hours from here, and then everything goes from there. So it's really easy for the cartel to bring their drugs here and move on to these other areas, particularly when you have willing participants, and there are.
You now, I understand, have been asked to be a special prosecutor in the hazing death of a young student at Bowling Green University. Are you going to be doing more of these consulting kind of prosecution cases? And as you go into this kind of a case that might be a little different than what you handled when you were at the U.S. Attorney's Office, what's your ground game?
So here I'm special counsel. I'm not the county prosecutor up in Bowling Green is going to handle any criminal matters. I'm asked to do the investigations, and then Bowling Green is going to find if there's code violations based on that findings of fact investigation. In fact, I'll let Bowling Green speak to that, but we're almost done. We'll be done probably by the end of this month with the investigation. But yeah, no, I think. One, it's Barnes & Thornburg, who happens to be our sponsor here today. That's something that they've done. That's the reason I went there, quite frankly, because there are a lot of AUSAs and former U.S. attorneys that work nationally for Barnes & Thornburg, and that's a big part of what we're about is doing these investigations for both for colleges and companies, and I'm also working with Jobs and Family Services on this PUA fraud, and that they know where to go because of that. And I love doing it, and I think I'm pretty good at it.
Parents look at cases like that and think, oh, Lord, you send your kid away to school, and this is what happens. I imagine for your family, the kinds of cases you've done over the years, did it influence the way you parented? Because you know about the drugs on the street, and you know about the gangs, and you know about the extremists, and did it make you a more wary parent?
I think actually less so, because I think my kids kind of saw that too, right? So they knew about, I'm not saying I'm a bad parent. My wife's a great parent, but I think they kind of saw that. They lived it, and they knew they were under protection. They remember being under protection, and they understand what I did, and I really appreciate them going through all that, because it wasn't easy. But to some extent, I was less worried about them because they knew the repercussions, because I'd be sitting at a dinner table telling them these horror stories all the time.
Well, I remember the people who were guarding my neighbor's house, they would play basketball with the kids.
Mm-hmm.
When he wasn't at home, they didn't have as much to do, but they were still guarding his house. So I imagine that for your kids, this is just a way of life. For your wife, maybe not so much.
Yeah, no, she reminds me that it's not so much a proper way of life. But she's also fantastic, though. I mean, I've been all over the world, some not so nice places, and my family actually went with me for 2 years. We went to the Republic of Georgia, and they moved with me, the whole family, and we lived there, and they end up loving it, but I'm not sure if too many wives and children would be willing to pack up and go to the ex-Republic of Georgia, not know anything about it. So, I love her, and she's fantastic, and she's put up with a lot. So.
The language barriers must have been nightmarish.
Yeah. I'm one of the few people that can speak a little Georgian, though. So it's not a very it's not a very popular language in the world. So.
As you look back at your job at the U.S. Attorney's Office here, how difficult is it going to be for you when they get to the prosecution of Larry Householder, when they move forward on these cases that were such a part of your career, and you were an intensive person, from what I've heard? How difficult is it for you to not want to be involved in that, not want to pick up the phone and talk to them and say, this is how I think you should be doing it, this is what you should be looking for?
I'm not saying I'm not going to do that. Whether they pick up the phone is another thing. It's killing me, and that case. And grand jury is a very, very secret thing. We keep it very serious, so I don't ask about the investigation at all. And these are been my friends for 20 years, and there's the MS-13 case here, and there's some of the murders, which is really kind of what I did as an AUSA to a lot of the violent crime stuff, and. There's cases in Dayton too. There was the Detective Del Rio was killed, and those cases are just I think about them all the time.
The cases involving the riots here in the Columbus area last year, obviously those are being handled on the local level. Nothing federal came out of that. But as you watched that unfold, did you? Some people are saying, I see why there was unrest. I see the relationship between police officers and especially communities of color. I know why they're angry. How did you weigh in on those cases?
Well, yeah, I could definitely see why people are angry. And, we had some pretty rough police shootings here in Columbus just after that, that are being investigated, and there's no secret about that. But crime's crime, and if you commit it, then we have a sworn duty to prosecute you for it. We did actually prosecute some cases out of the summer protests and riots based on firearms offenses. But for the most part, and honestly, I can say this now because I've moved, but I lived on the corner of Gay and High Street, and during that, I watched the whole thing, and you saw kind of the angry sort of people going through, and then you saw people that seem to be taking advantage of the situation, going through and causing trouble just to do it. And you also saw other protesters, the vast majority of them were peaceful and angry, going after the people that were sitting there. And quite frankly, the vast majority of that we investigated, the people that were causing most of the crime were white guys. I mean, they were. And they were there. I'm not sure why they were there. I'm not sure what they were doing, but there was this kind of Antifa movement, maybe. I don't know if they're Antifa, but we didn't prosecute anybody for coming into the state, crossing state lines to commit any particular act, but we sure looked at a lot of them.
I'm going to remind everyone that in a few minutes, we're going to take audience questions, which is kind of our custom. So if you have a question, and I'm sure many of you do, Jane's going to get a microphone ready for you. I don't know how you're handling that, Jane. But I have a final question for you, which is, we listened to the breadth and depth of your experience. You were clearly passionate about justice and what you did. A lot of people were saddened that you left that office. Would you, when that 5-year period is up, would you ever want to go back? Would you want to be reappointed to be U.S. Attorney or go back into a prosecutorial kind of role?
This is sponsored by Barnes & Thorburn. So I work with Can't really I would absolutely entertain that, and my firm knows that that's something that I would consider. I don't know if it's going to be right for me in 5 years. I have no idea, but yeah, I've been a prosecutor my entire life, and I loved it. So. Well,
let me give you a final chance to put a plug in for Barnes & Thornburg and talk about the kind of work that you hope you get to do there.
Yeah, I think one of the things that Barnes they do a lot of different things, or we do a lot of different things, but a lot of that is these investigations, and there's a lot of different companies, corporations, universities, enterprises that we want to go ahead and help them out as clients to investigate any issues, any problems, any legalities that may be happening, and we're here for it.
Barnes & Thornburg, everyone. Jane, I know we've been getting questions online too, and we welcome and thank our online audience. And can you start with the first question?
Sure, we're going to go back and forth between online questions and folks here in the audience. So anyone in the audience that has a question, feel free to get up here. And by the way, I'm going to have to charge Barnes & Thornburg a little bit more money for the sponsorship today. Thank you very much, Dave. Bill Lafayette says, when you exact a penalty against a corporation like First Energy, the ones who really pay are the remote shareholders. How do we address that? Is it just a risk of holding stock?
No, that's true. And shareholders can sue those enterprises for the misconduct. So there's a civil balance there. And if there's fines and restitution, then the restitution is going to go to the victims of the fraud first. In any sort of case like that. But then the shareholders can sue the corporation and the assets of the corporation based on illegalities.
Hello, Renee Delane from Women Who Dare. And Mr. DeVillers, we obviously, all of us noted that you lead with your values, which are integrity and courage. Can you tell us a little bit about your roots or what influenced you in your life to live this way and lead your life this way? I had a great family, I think. I grew up kind of lower middle class in New York, and my military family, So, my parents and kind of always, taught me to do what's right. I've been always known what's right, but I try to do what's right. And my wife and my kids and my friends seem to be that way. Again, I don't know any better. I've always been just a prosecutor. Since my first year of law school, I was an intern, so it's all I've done.
Another question from online. Andrew Tobias would like to know Dave's feelings on the role of dark money in state politics, given its role in the case he led, and whether any reforms are needed.
Andrew Tobias of the Cleveland Plain Dealer, maybe. So
could be
he
like,
knows.
yeah.
But so yeah. So we have these things, and I don't want to get in too much. It's very complicated. But 501c4s are an animal created by the government for social welfare. So people can go ahead and create these organizations that do not have to report their donors to the Federal Election Committee. And it sounds great, but in practicality, the problem is they're not supposed to be, their primary role can't be political. But you can use that money that no one knows about, and millions and hundreds of millions, tens of millions of dollars can go into it, and you have no idea who is donating to it, and you can have 99% of the funding could go to attack a particular
ballot initiative or to support a particular ballot initiative, because that's not considered politics within the meaning of the 501c4. You can't attack or support a particular candidate for office as a majority of what you're doing. So 49% of the funds going into a 501c4 can be used to attack or support a particular candidate. And that's the problem. You know, I understand you want to be, anonymous when it comes to speech often. That's a right. But are we going to say that you can be anonymous as far as funding, political funding? And that's a political decision.
I have to inject here. Should Citizens United be overturned?
Well, it actually has nothing to do with Citizens United, because Citizens United allows it to happen, but Citizens United basically set up super PACs. So super PACs, you can donate as much money as you want, but you have to report your donors to the SEC. The problem is with 501c4s is you don't have to. That's the issue. That's why it's dark money. That's why super PACs are millions of dollars. The Koch brothers and George Soros, they can throw as many money as you want. But you know who's doing it. With dark money, you don't, and that's what a 501c4 is.
Carol?
Hi, Dave. I'm Carol
Carol.
Looper. A headline just popped up on my phone. The female police officer who shot and killed Dante Wright has just been charged with second-degree manslaughter. Would you explain second-degree manslaughter?
So it's different between states. If there's intentional murder, right, which is an F1 murder, and then there's manslaughter where you go and you commit a particular felonies, and as a direct result of that felony, someone dies. That's a manslaughter. And then there's kind of reckless killing or negligent homicide. In Ohio, we have negligent homicide, where if you negligently kill somebody, that is, you don't mean to do it, but you're negligent in fulfilling your duties and you kill somebody, that would be negligent homicide. Reckless manslaughter could be also reckless killing. So with disregard to the safety of somebody, you commit an act with reckless disregard, and someone dies as a result of that, that would be manslaughter.
When you heard that she thought her gun was a taser, handguns and tasers feel and weigh very differently. Were you surprised that that's how that was explained?
I actually saw the video and heard the strange part is before, as you hear the video, you hear taser, 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 and that's what police are trained to do, say I have a taser. But you can see the person has a Glock in their hand as they're saying taser, taser. And you can almost, it's a body cam, so the other police officers don't necessarily see what's going on. You almost see it happening, unfortunately. But yeah, it's if the person somehow was making this up and intended to kill the person, that's flat out murder. If you can prove that, that's intentional killing. But if it's negligent or it's reckless, it is a negligent homicide or it should be a manslaughter. It's still a very, very serious offense. It's still a homicide offense.
It's still jail time.
It can still be jail time. It's completely up to the judge, depending on the law of that particular state.
Okay, I've got a lot of good questions. Someone on YouTube, doesn't say who, I'm curious as to whether Mr. DeVillers has ever in the past considered running for political office, or if that is something that he might think about in the future.
No, I'm not. Again, it's all this. And I've said this a number of times. Is I'd love to be an office holder. That's why I like being U.S. attorney. I just want to run for it. I mean, and the problem is that you have to ask for money, right? You have to do that. And God bless the politicians that do it, because you have to. There's no way around it the way our system is. And I'm not built for it.
Hi, I'm Carol McGuire. Let's talk about leaks. How do you go through an investigation as deep and broad as this householder one was, and for what I'm assuming was a fairly lengthy period of time, and prevent the leaks that might be very tempting to make by some folks?
We went to pretty great extremes in that particular case. One is I kept the case in Cincinnati. So for a long story, kind of started there anyway. And the two AUSAs are fantastic. They're running the case. But we kept it there because we didn't want to bring it, and Columbus has got great AUSAs too, and it's the capital. But we're like, let's keep it there, not because there's any leaks in Columbus, and there aren't, but there's still that possibility. A draft indictment of garbage, anything like that could come across. But The other way, the reason is we didn't do it, it wasn't leaks, is because we didn't do those subpoenas. We didn't do those search warrants. We didn't do things where they could become aware. That's why I keep stressing that the investigation really started in July of last year.
I have to ask you, when you realize that this is the Speaker of the House in Ohio, a political figure who had a lot of clout, did that make you be more double down on your accuracy in this case? Were you concerned about the politics of it?
You know, before this, I knew less about state house politics than I did, medieval architecture. And I know nothing about medieval architecture. So it's not something that I really, was deeply involved with. But yeah, anytime you're going to go after a politician, you need to make sure, you want to make sure you get all your your I's dotted and T's crossed. But at the same time, you shouldn't be treated any different than anybody else. If you commit the crime, they commit the crime. And I think that's a problem that we've had, and I'll say me too, like with the Southern District, I've been for 20 years, I think we've been passive and a bit tentative about pulling the trigger on corruption, particularly corruption cases, because of that. And when I became U.S. Attorney, the one thing, I think the very first thing I told the entire office is, don't be afraid to lose a trial. If you have the case, if there's probable cause, if you are convinced they're guilty, you're never going to get in trouble if you try to prosecute it. So.
This is from Kathy Ann Kowalski from Energy News Network and Eye on Ohio, and I'm going to read this verbatim. Criminal charges relating to House Bill 6 have not yet been filed against First Energy Harbor, or any former officers of or PUC as of 3/25, which is when she submitted this question. Why then wouldn't it be in the public interest to lift stays of civil proceedings that are currently benefiting the two companies, especially when any company personnel remain free to assert their Fifth Amendment rights in discovery?
They have been paused. A lot of the discovery in the civil cases. Dave Yost, our Attorney General, has been working some things, and we've talked, and made it clear, and he's made it clear that he would. If we thought that the discovery was going to jeopardize our criminal investigation and trials, then they would be paused. And a lot of it is paused. Some can go forward to a point, but a lot of the civil litigation is paused because of that.
What's the timetable on the criminal case? Do you know?
So again, I don't want to on the trial that's pending, the indictment.
Yeah.
I think it's set for right now in the fall, but it probably won't go till. I would be surprised if it goes to trial this year. And that's based on primarily that's a COVID area, because
right.
We've got people that are already locked up in prison. They have first shot at going to trial.
So it's more of having the space in the courthouse.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're seeing violence escalated here in Columbus, and the question is, if you could wave a magic wand, what would you do to curb violence? Any new gun rules?
The one thing that as far as gun rules are concerned, things we see are often these gun shows. There's been a lot about it, and it is true that all federally licensed dealers, even at gun shows, have to go ahead and get your ID before they sell it to you. But let's say I have like 7 guns and I go to a gun show and just Dave, I'm not doing it to make money. I'm just doing it to recoup or sell some antique gun. I can do that, and I don't have to ask for ID, and that is a legitimate loophole in the system. Are we going to? And I get that people don't want to do it. I get that people are like, I don't want to get in trouble for selling someone a gun, so why do I have to? That's my constitutional right to have it and sell it. I'm just a person. I'm not here to make money off it. But if we really want to go ahead and show like firearm responsibility and be able to trace firearms, that's the best way to go about doing it. Another way to do it is quite frankly, is what we call NIBIN. That is, when a guy makes a gun, a gun manufacturer makes a gun, he shoots it in the water, gets a serial number, takes that shell casing that came out of it, puts it in a system, and that shell casing is always matched to that gun. That is, so if there's a crime committed in LA and that gun leaves a shell casing, we can then say, we know that shell casing came from that gun with that serial number. Let's trace who bought that gun, if that person bought the gun, who they sell it to, and so on and so on. So that's something we can do.
That seems pretty easy.
Well, it's manpower intensive, because it's not just the computer.
Yeah.
They also have to look at, but it's you can do it.
great.
Jane, I think we have time. I'm getting the signal for one more question. Pick a good one.
You mentioned a couple of possible reforms in the judicial system, and then I also have a question about is there racial prejudice in the judicial system? Are there other reforms you'd like to see? Perfect world, what would you do?
Again, I like the concept of de-electing judges and having like a committee, bipartisan committee that's selected by probably the governor and or county commissioners or the legislature or something to that effect. We have Democrats and Republicans on it, do it, and the bar associations get involved. As far as, I think there's race in a lot of our system. I think we do have a lot of African American judges here in Franklin County. I think we're fortunate, but and I think it is a diverse bench, but that's not like that everywhere in Ohio.
Mr. DeVillers, we thank you so much for being frank and honest. It's been really enlightening. Yes, please, thank him.
Thanks for having me.
Really wonderful.
Well, folks, I hope you found today's forum as insightful as I did. It was really, really interesting, Dave and Colleen. Next week, we'll convene our annual State of Nonprofits Forum featuring Director of Human Service Chamber of Central Ohio, Michael Corey. Thanks to the Emergency Response Fund of the Columbus Foundation for presenting our live stream partnership with the Columbus Dispatch and PNC. And thanks once again to our sponsors, Barnes & Thornburg. Thanks again to all of our online virtual seat patrons, and once again to our speakers. Thank you all. Tune in next week. Until then, be well and stay safe. Thanks all.